Chris Rogers is the founder and CEO of CSP Agency, a human-first AI-enhanced marketing firm providing geo and SEO solutions for B2B and e-commerce brands. With that, Chris, we're thrilled to have you at the live event, and I am very much looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thanks so much. 89% of B2B buyers have adopted generative AI for purchase research. And at this point, they haven't just adopted it. It's now the #1 way that buyers are researching purchases, above vendors, above peer conversations, above everything. And it's growing. So Gartner predicts that by 2028, 90% of B2B buying is going to be intermediated by AI agents. So the question that we have to ask is, when these generative engines with this conversational interface is doing the recommending, are you in the answer? What are the best value hurricane connectors that meet building code requirements? In this case, one brand dominates. No other brands were actually even shown in the answer. So this is Simpson Strong-Tie. They're a global manufacturer of connectors, fasteners, and building solutions, and they're one of our GEO clients. My name's Chris Rogers. I'm the founder and CEO of CSP Agency. We provide GEO and SEO services for B2B and e-commerce. So we have a shift that is taking place within search engines, within the search landscape. In traditional search, we have a list of 10 blue links, and customers are going through the buyer's journey by clicking on different links, forming opinions, and ultimately making purchase decisions. In the new era of AI search, generative engines are doing all of that research. They're forming their own opinions and providing a direct recommendation. So your brand has an opportunity to be there, but if you're not present, then you're virtually invisible. The other caveat here is that ranking #1 on Google does not guarantee that you're going to be in that answer. So what is GEO? GEO stands for Generative Engine Optimization. It's the process of optimizing for online visibility in generative engines like ChatGPT, Google's Gemini, AI Overviews, AI Mode, Claude, Grok, all the generative engines. GEO encompasses AEO, AI Search, AI SEO, all of the acronyms and alphabet soup that's going around these days. There is an important caveat here. SEO is still important, and it really is your foundation. So SEO is your table stakes to go in and compete in GEO. So these are the 3 pillars of GEO: accessibility, owned media, and earned media. And we're going to get into more depth on these in just a moment. But before we do, we have to talk about what drives the entire strategy. So the first mistake you can make when you're approaching GEO is to approach it like a technical hack. How do I optimize for ChatGPT? Look at this example prompt here. What are the best hurricane ties to use in high wind zones? That's not a keyword. That is a unique human-driven situation, and the human is the foundation. And the situation in this case is insurance mandating wind-resistant construction in high wind coastal areas. Okay, so we have to understand those situations to ultimately come up with our prompts and our GEO strategy. So let's take a look at how we come up with these human situations, how we identify them. So this is CSP's Human First GEO framework. This is how we execute GEO for our clients. We use proprietary and third-party software, AI workflows, agents, etc. But you can take this as a foundation and execute upon it, and it will put you ahead of most of the market at this point. To leverage it most effectively, you want to align it with business priorities, live prompt data, and competitive analysis. The first phase here is understanding. So it really is digging into your unique value proposition, the personas that you target, and the problem solution fit. From there, you can identify the unique buying situations that drive your customers to you. So these can be goal-driven, pain-driven, event-driven. There's all different types of buying situations that characterize how the moments when your customers are being driven to you. Once you've identified and prioritized those buying situations, you can then map specific prompts to those various buying situations. And then phase 3 is activate. So this is when you're actually creating content, when you're shaping narrative, and you're executing your campaign through owned and earned channels. So let's look at some specific buying situations for our example persona. So for the example persona, we have the general contractor in coastal and hurricane-prone regions. These are 4 distinct buying situations. So we have new construction in a hurricane zone requiring code compliance, failed inspection requiring specific connector upgrades, storm damage repair requiring structural reconnection, and case in point, insurance mandating wind-resistant construction. So these are unique human-driven situations that will all ultimately lead to different prompts and different prompt variations. If you were taking this from a keyword approach, you might collapse this into maybe a handful of keywords that have to do with hurricane ties. So certainly understanding the audience and these situations is key. So let's get back into the 3 pillars. Accessibility is all about ensuring that AI can actually get into your website, can get in the front door and access the information inside. We have a plethora of different LLM generative engine bots that crawl and try to access websites. With SEO, we've got a Google bot, Bing bot, maybe a couple that we're paying attention to. We have a lot more here. There are bots with the LLMs that are tasked with consuming content for their training data. And then we've also got bots that are coming in during live search, going into either Google or Bing's index, going into web pages, retrieving information to synthesize answers. We have to look at bot accessibility at the server level. Things like, the rules that you have on your server, things like firewalls. JavaScript also plays a really large role. So if you have a server-side or client-side rendering, a JavaScript environment, that can be very problematic. And even on the front of your web pages, even if it's just elements that are in JavaScript, a lot of these bots have a lot of challenges there. If it sounds like sounds a lot like SEO, it's because there is a lot of crossover with accessibility. So if you have strong technical SEO, at worst, you shouldn't be too far off from being able to establish strong accessibility for the LLMs. So accessibility is all about letting AI in the front door. Your owned media and the brand pyramid is really what it consumes once it's in the front door. So we've got 4 different layers here, and they represent different types of content that live on your website. First, we have the foundations layer, the who you are, who you serve, what you solve. Okay, this is going to relate back to your homepage, your about page, even your footer. Those things need to be really clear, not just for LLMs, but for your audience as well. And then we've got our solutions or product categories organized by how buyers think. And that's the important caveat there. So if you're an e-commerce site, for instance, it's expected you're going to have your product catalog, but you also want to look at that through a lens of how do my customers think about this? What are the solutions that, what are the problems they have that our products are going to solve? Simpson Strong-Tie does a good job at this, where they have their actual products, but they've also got solutions. These can be by industries, they can take different forms. And then we've got capabilities and use cases. These are even a little bit more finite pages. So it is how products or services apply to specific needs. If you are a manufacturer, this could be installation instructions, right, for a specific application. If you were a distributor, it could be selection guides. And then we get to the top of the pyramid and we have situational content. This is content that's going to live on your blog. And this is content that we have the opportunity to directly influence the LLMs, the generative engines. So let's take a look at that top section of the brand pyramid a little bit more close. So these are some specific types of situational content. First, we've got situation-driven pages. So if we've gone through the process of identifying all of the different buying situations, we prioritize those by our business goals. We've looked at some prompt data and competitive positioning. From there, we can create content that directly resonates with our target audience in those unique situations, right? You should have, at that point, prompts that are mapped to those individual situations. And if you have the situations mapped with prompts, that is the meat of what you need to create those pages. We have comparison and alternative content. So this can be head-to-head brand comparison, you versus your competitor. It can be alternative. So brand X alternatives for, competitors that you have that have clients that maybe are looking for another option. And we've got these best X of Y, right? So things like best hurricane ties for high wind zones. This type of content does very well in the LLMs as well. And then we have prompt gap content from AI tracking. Okay, so Once you have identified all your prompts, you do need to track these and run these against LLMs to get data back, and also be running that against your competitors. And in that process, you're going to identify gaps where your competitors have visibility, where they're getting mentions, and where you can directly create content that fills those gaps. That'd be the last type of that situational content. So owned media is your story, and that's great, but your story alone is not enough. AI wants to validate, it wants to cross-reference, it's seeking consensus. So earned media is really where you take everything that you built in your owned media in the brand pyramid, and you are reinforcing that and replicating that across the wider internet ecosystem. It is where you make the internet agree with your own media. And an important caveat here, when we look at earned media for GEO, it is not all pure earned media. Everything off page will go in the earned media bucket. So some of that is pay to play. Some of that may be on social networks or community sites. And we can look at some of the specific strategies and tactics here. So within earned media, we've got two different groupings. We've got narrative and sources. Narrative is most closely aligned with traditional PR. Thought leadership and narrative shaping is things like executive bylines, op-eds, contributed articles. These are things where you really have the voice and the point of view. With media pitching and coverage, it is the journalist, it is the media that's going to have the voice, and you have an opportunity to influence that. And then we've got sources. So in our prompt tracking, we're going to identify specific sources that are being cited, that are influencing the LLMs and are being cited as reputable sources. These could be things like Reddit, YouTube, LinkedIn, and then their individual strategies for optimizing each of those channels. And then we have geo link building. This is really where you take some of the tried and true strategies that are associated with SEO, but you look at where the opportunity is to craft the content that's being placed so that it influences the LLMs. Again, we track back to those buying situations and our targeted prompts. So what's next? Start with your buyers, right? Start with the human first geo framework. Grounding your prompt and geo strategy in your business, your actual audience, their problems is the most important thing you can do. The biggest mistake that I see out there is trying to come up with prompts by looking at keywords or using just kind of random tools. It needs to be grounded in what's important for your organization. Audit across the 3 pillars. So accessibility, you can do audits with accessibility in Claude Cowork. You can do that in Perplexity Computer. There's a software called Noatoa that's fairly inexpensive to start, and that has some good accessibility testing. For your owned media, this is where you're going to be doing prompt tracking, and you have to look and see where your content, your owned media, is showing up for mentions and citations. And then on the earned side, it is looking at those third-party sources and where your brand is being mentioned across those third-party sources. Once you've audited that, you can prioritize the biggest gaps that are out there, execute across owned and earned. Don't try to boil the ocean, pick a few things to start, and then ultimately measure the impact. And then the last thing you have to just decide is, this is a time of early adoption or the wait and see. And everybody fits in different camps, right? So the advantage of getting ahead of it is that you can really forge this path and be at the front of the pack. But these things are evolving in real time. If you take more of the wait and see approach, the best practices and the ways you do this will become more and more cemented, but the competitive landscape will be more saturated. So it's up to you how you want to proceed. Well, I hope this was valuable. I hope you found this educational and helpful as you go down the road of AI search and generative engine optimization.
Fantastic. Well, for everyone that's listening in live, you have a Q&A box right in front of you. So if you have questions for Chris, he's actually joining us on the very next Q&A panel, and we'll do our best to get to as many of the questions that come in on this next live panel in just a few minutes.